Hello and welcome back to everyone that's tuned in to the American Ultras Talk channel. Here we are, finally bringing our first preview of Copa America or Copa America as we try to make something special this summer. So happy to be here bringing to you guys a preview of the game against Bolivia. Now, you see it on our background, we're all excited about this. We're going to get straight into it, but we have to analyze before previewing the game the retrospect, the very recent games that both teams had. We know what we did. I think that we bounced back with a valiant effort against Brazil. Everybody knows, but looking at our opponent, Braden, they haven't really looked the best, and they have been historically one of the weakest teams in CONMEBOL. What do you think? Anything notorious to analyze from their recent games?
Well, I'll just start with the recent games for the US because I think it's pretty straightforward. By now, we all know the situation behind the USMNT. Obviously, we won CONCACAF Nations League in March thanks to a pretty shaky result against Jamaica, getting bailed out by Union legend Corey Burke scoring an own goal, and then comfortably winning in extra time thanks to the ability of Reina and Haji Wright. And then a very comfortable 2-0 win over Mexico in the final, as always, establishing our dominance over El Tri, who are firmly second best now in the region, maybe even third or fourth at this rate. But and then I'll get into Bolivia because I think we all know the friendlies are recent in our mind for the U.S. The 5-1 loss to Colombia, we never want to speak about that one again. And then a good result against Brazil, but ultimately a game where we probably should have lost. Turner had the game of his life, making 11 saves, which I think is the most for a USMNT keeper since the Tim Howard legacy game against Belgium, that we ended up actually losing that one. But for Bolivia, like you said, they have not been that great. And it's not really a surprise because historically they've been probably the weakest team in CONMEBOL. They're currently ninth out of 10 teams in World Cup qualifying for 2026. Only one win, 5 losses in 6 games, and their only win was at home against Peru, who are bottom. They have only 4 goals scored across that run and 14 conceded. And for context, the second most conceded in World Cup qualifying is Peru with 8. So almost doubled second to worst. So their defense is very, very shaky. They obviously have the worst goal difference as well. In their March camp, they had not really meaningful games. They played Algeria and Andorra in friendlies, lost Algeria 3-2 narrowly, beat Andorra 1-0, but that's one of the worst sides in UEFA. I wouldn't put too much stock into that. And then in their June camp, their tune-up friendlies, their preparation for Copa America, they played Mexico's U23s first and lost to them. They lost 1-0 to Mexico's U23s in a game where I wouldn't say they were completely dominated, but they were pretty definitively second best, deserved to lose the game against a U23 team that won't even be playing in the Olympics this summer, getting beat by Guatemala in the U20 World Cup a couple of years ago. So definitely not a great game from them. Only really spark to watch was Miguel Terceros, who I highlighted in our Wonder Kids to Watch video at Copa America. Go check that out if you haven't already. Similar story in their next one. They lost 3-1 to Ecuador's B team. It was fully the reserves trying to give their backups a chance to earn more minutes, kind of like we saw a little bit with the USMNT, but a lot larger of a scale with Ecuador. Again, their only spark being Miguel Terceros coming off the bench, getting his first international goal, but by then it was too late. In the 88th minute, they were already down 3-0. Pretty convincing defeat. And then their last one, another pretty heavy loss, 3-0 to Colombia. It was Colombia's first team, but I mean, the Colombians, we know how badly they dominated us. It was the same against Bolivia. They scored in the first 5 minutes. They were up 3-0 at halftime. Then we're content to take their foot off the gas against their CONMEBOL rivals and just cruise out for the last 45 minutes. But definitely not results to be encouraged by from a Bolivia perspective. And especially since they have had a history, especially recently, of conceding a lot of goals, I think it's something to be optimistic about, despite the fact that with our tactics and Berhalter ball, sometimes we can struggle with putting the ball in the back of the net, but we're playing a team where it's going to be a little bit easier than maybe later rounds.
Absolutely, and I just want to highlight something. Marcelo Moreno, I've spoken about him in the past. Well, he just had an interview last week, absolutely grilling the federation, saying that everything is wrong. They don't even give the players. It sounds a lot like Jamaica-esque for the preparation, and he said it's actually to the level where the players have to pay for their hotel, which is insane, really. So I don't really think, and you highlighted Terceros. I think he's probably one of the bright sparks here, but he can't even get minutes at Santos, so it shows kind of the level where they're at. So looking at these results now, who do you think both teams will field on the pitch? Let's focus primarily on the U.S. because that's really what matters. No one's really going to be keeping an eye on Bolivia. Who do you think we're going to field out? Because as you said, Haji Wright did come in clutch, and we saw in the camps he didn't really get a start in either of the friendlies. So do you think any surprises or any tweaks here and there for Greg? What would you go with, Braden?
It's a good thing we're focusing on the U.S. because, in all honesty, I could not tell you who Bolivia is going to field. No idea. They could go out with a number of different formations, really, and a number of different players. Couldn't tell you, but what I do know is I think the USMNT lineup is pretty set in stone. We saw this in the friendlies. It was unfortunate to see players like Haji, like you mentioned, Malik Tillman, not get as much of a chance as I would have liked them to see, try to stake their claim for maybe a spot in the team, but it will be Matt Turner in goal, Scally, Richards, Ream, and Jedi Robinson at the back, which was the lineup for both friendlies. I think it will be Johnny Cardoso at the CDM spot, just because I'm not too sure about the health of Adams, and I think you would probably want to save him for the bigger games. We saw them do that with the friendlies. Brazil was the more marquee matchup, even though I think we've touched on this in the past. Colombia are a better team than Brazil right now. Brazil was seen as the primary match in that camp, and Adams was saved for that game, despite Johnny's ties historically to Brazil. So I think Johnny will start here, given that Bolivia is probably the weakest team in this group. And then to partner him in the midfield, it'll be McKennie and Reyna, like it always is. Unfortunately, Reyna not playing at the 10, like we want him to, but rather as an 8, probably at the left center mid spot alongside McKennie on the right. And then for the forwards, it's pretty straightforward. Tim Weah, Christian Pulisic on the wings, and I think it will be Balogun up top. Greg seems to go back to starting Balogun. He does tend to give Pepe a chance. We saw him start against Brazil, and Haji did get a chance in the past starting as striker against Mexico, getting rewarded after his clutch performance off the bench against Jamaica back in the Nations League camp. But I do think it'll be Balogun. He always tends to go back there, and especially I think against Bolivia, a weaker opponent, he'll go with a player who he's more familiar with. And like I said, going back to the friendlies, Balogun started against Colombia, Pepe started against Brazil. If that is any indication of maybe Pepe being the starter for the tougher games, it'll be Balogun. And regardless, I think Balogun's the number 1 starter for Greg. So I think that will be the lineup. Let me know if you have any changes, but I think it's pretty locked in.
Yeah, I just will say I think that I agree with you, although I think that he would start Adams if he was healthy. I don't think that will be the case, and I'll be honest, Adams looked a little bit rusty against Brazil too. Everyone was at a different pace in the game, so I think that but I would like to see him get some minutes, last 20 minutes of the game, just to get some match sharpness. Hopefully that happens. And I will say, even though Balogun will likely start, I don't think that this is really the game for him. I would go with Pepe, because I think that Bolivia would just be sitting on a low block, and we know how Balogun just really thrives off pace or when teams are a little bit more open. I think against Panama, he will definitely score maybe a hat trick. I think he's going to have a good game there. But I would start Pepe actually against Bolivia. Now, we'll see if that happens, but regardless, Greg's going to field what seems to be a pretty straightforward 11. And what is your prediction for the game, but not only on the scoreline, but also how you see the game going? Will Colombia go with a 9-1-1 formation?
Yeah, it's perfect transition there. Talking about the fit of the strikers, I do agree. I think Pepe fits this game a lot better because, like you said, Bolivia will probably be parking the bus, as Jose Mourinho likes to do so often in his career, and still might, who knows. But I think they'll be putting a lot of men behind the ball. They have tried a number of different formations since they hired their new manager. They seem to play a 4-2-3-1 in games that they have a chance at winning, like their win against Peru in World Cup qualifying, and even the game against Mexico U23s that they ended up losing in kind of embarrassing fashion. But they have also experimented with a 3 or a 5 back system. You can go either way. It's basically the same thing. And I think that is what they'll use against the USMNT, a pretty superior opponent. I think they'll recognize that. They'll give us the respect that it's due. And it's unfortunate because it seems like when opponents don't give us respect, like you mentioned with Panama, they try to play open. This happens every time against Mexico. We end up dominating them. But then when opponents do give us respect, try to play behind the ball and defend for 90 minutes, we have a really tough time breaking them down. It's kind of like, I think I've made this comparison, maybe not on a video in the past, but it's going to be like the Euros, where every single game at the tournament is exciting until you get to, in the Euros case, England and Gareth Southgate. For Copa America, it's going to be the US and Berhalter. They're going to drain the life out of the tournament for the one match day, and then it'll go back to all being entertaining games after that, especially against Bolivia here, where they're going to defend for 90 minutes and we're just going to pass the ball around, have meaningless possession, try to spam crosses into Balogun, who it's clearly not his forte. If Pepe was in, maybe we'd have a bit of a chance, and maybe he will start. I hope he does, but I do think it'll be Balogun, and it'll just be a bunch of missed opportunities, half chances for 70, 75 minutes. Subs will come in, as they always do. I think this will be kind of a carbon copy of the Uzbekistan friendly from last year, and even the Trinidad and Tobago home leg as well. Both of those ended 3-0, but all of the goals came late. We had a tough time breaking them down, but subs came in, we had fresh legs, they had tired legs in the defense after defending for the whole game. I think it'll be a similar thing here. Bolivia have a lot of experience playing this way. They do it in almost every CONMEBOL match they play, especially away from home, which they will be here. I think this is going to be one of the few games that the US could play in this tournament where they might actually have a home majority in the crowd, which is kind of sad if you think about it deeply, but that's a whole different topic for a different day. So with all that being said, I'm going to go for a 2-0 win in this one, which maybe it's a little bit underwhelming for some people, but at the end of the day, we just have to get the 3 points on the board, even if it's ugly, and I suspect it will be for the majority of the game. A win is a win, and that's really the most important thing here.
Well, I think we heavily disagree. Maybe it's the first time we heavily disagree on something. I think that Bolivia are absolutely horrible, awful. I said it in the first prediction we did with Pete. Thanks, Pete. Again, can't stress it enough. But I really don't see this Bolivia side being able to hold up our pressure. I think they're just so bad. I don't think that we'll come into this, especially after the interview. Their biggest legend ever, arguably Marcelo Moreno, finishing as a top goal scorer in the CONMEBOL qualifiers for Bolivia. Major achievement. He was grilling Chumacero, a former player as well, was absolutely destroying and saying that this generation sucks, which honestly is just unfair on the guys too. I mean, the guys are trying to do their best. What can they do? I think that the spirits aren't high, and a good sample is they lost to Mexico's U23s, who in hindsight lost to Japan's U19s. I mean, we have to destroy Bolivia. I mean, if we don't win this game, I expect that, especially after that game against Brazil, some spark has ignited, and I think it's just so well structured for Greg to get a big victory here, and everyone will jump back in trying to defend him from the usual suspects that we know like to defend him. So I'm going to predict actually a 4-0 win for the US. I can't see Bolivia scoring, and it's going to be tough until the very first one goes in. Then the game will be over, in my opinion. Kind of like how it happens with City in the Prem. After the first goal, you already know the result. So let us know in the comments down below what you guys think about this video and what you thought about the prediction as well, because we're trying to see what type of structures you guys would like to see. There will be a lot of previews for this Copa America. Let us know your prediction as well, and let's see if there will be a surprise. Hopefully not, and make sure to give a like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and I'll see you next time.